You're listening to Unfiltered, real talk about sex and love with Ashley
and Heather. And today this is the first episode in a 2-part series, and we are just talking about parenting while in recovery, which this is one of the things that I think we could spend so much time talking about, because even though when people come to us for healing, we tell them, okay, get healing for yourself, healing for your marriage, healing for your family, but sometimes in the midst of all of everything that's going on and the chaos and the craziness, it's like, okay, how do I parent well in a way that I'm not going to hurt my kids, and then our family is healing together? And so that's really the focus of a lot of these questions. So the first one is, how much of my story should I share with my kids? We hear this question a lot because I think that a lot of parents think that they might overshare with their kids or give them information that, kind of plants ideas in their kids' head. But really, I think that telling our story of our struggles and how we're finding healing as a couple and healing for our family should be done, always should be given truthfully and in a way that's age appropriate.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think that if you have little kids, the language that you use is going to be different than if you have teenagers. So if you have little kids, you would say something like, well, daddy did something that hurt mommy's feelings, something like that. Whereas if you have older kids, then you can use better language, more accurate language to help them understand that this is really what's happening in our relationship, but that also we're getting help for it and that we're going to be okay. Because I think that that's one of the other fears too that parents have is if I share this with my kids, I don't want to burden my kids with something, but I want to give them enough information because I already know that they feel what's happening in our family. And I want to give them words to go with that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And I feel like I really got a chance to practice this because when John and I were going through our recovery process, when we first started, the twins were 10. And then that means Ayla would have been like 3 or 4, and Waylon would have been 2 or 3. And so, that was initially. And so, different language. And I think I remember sharing, Ayla praying for daddy to be honest. Yes. And it's like, we didn't tell her anything. It's like, oh, well, she picked it up. She picked up that there was something wrong in the house. And then the twins, they got a little more information. But then years down the road, John had a relapse. And so the twins were teenagers. And so we were just very honest, like, John told him, I've been struggling with pornography and we've been doing really good, but I've relapsed and it really hurt your mom. And then, like you said, with the younger kids, it was mommy hurt daddy. And we use the example of, when sometimes you and your brother fight or your brother lies to you and it makes you very angry. And, and so you guys might need a break from each other, and then you need to come back and talk and make a new plan. And so we use that kind of language. But I think the biggest thing is, like you said, make sure they know that they're safe and that they know it's not about them, so that they know you didn't do anything wrong. And so if I'm checked out as a mom, whether I'm the betrayed spouse or the struggling spouse, if I'm checked out, if I'm in my head, if I'm feeling guilt and shame or stressed or hurt or pain, I can be in my head. And so I might need to let my kids know, I'm not ignoring you because you're doing anything wrong. I'm really struggling with something and I'm very sad today and it has nothing to do with you. And so if it seems like I'm not paying attention to you, then that's why, and it's not about you. Or, I might, give you guys some extra game time today or movie time or order a pizza because I'm just feeling really sad and mommy needs some time to work in her journal or talk with her friend or go on a walk and just be honest with them.
Yeah. And it really is important because if we don't give our kids information, they're going to fill in the gaps themselves. They're going to create their own narrative. And a lot of times they're going to take on that because in their little brains and in their little world, they think that, oh, well, mommy's acted this way before when I did something naughty, and so I must have done something bad, and so we want to make sure that we're communicating that in a really healthy way so that they don't take on the blame and shame of what's happening.
And the other thing too that we have gotten so much at conferences, and I've experienced myself because my kids were still they are still growing up. Like now our younger ones are 14 and 12, is just, did we do too much damage when we were in that state as addict and betrayed spouse? And just, I guess, encouragement to those of you who are listening is that God can redeem that. He can cover those gaps. You are not going to be a perfect parent because you're like trying to parent with a limb missing or something, that you're hurting. And so give yourself some grace. And if you need to pull back on some activities and volunteer opportunities or whatever it is you need to do, maybe you're not making the perfect meals. Maybe you're ordering home meal kits, which I'm doing right now, and it's saving my life. Maybe you hire a housekeeper. Maybe you're not able to do as much as you were able to do before, and that's okay.
Yep.
You do not need to maintain the same level of wifing and parenting while you're going through either recovery, if you're the struggler, or betrayal trauma. And that's okay. You can even say, for the next year, I really need to have more margin, and I'm not going to go to these family functions. It's too painful, or it's too tempting, or whatever the case may be. Okay, the second question is, will sharing my struggles give my kids permission to do the same? This is a question we get quite a bit. And I mean, I'm not going to guarantee that if you share your struggles, your kids will not be like, well, you did it, so I can do it. I mean, that would be really not nice of me to guarantee that. But what I can say from years, almost a decade of experience now working with parents and my own experience, is that your kids are already going to be exposed and learn about so many things out there in the world. And so even if you, in talking with them, expose them to something first, it's better that it comes from you than it does from wherever. And also, some kids can experience a sense of betrayal. Like, let's say you had sex before marriage and you painted a picture for your kids that you and your husband, like, you never want them to find out that happened. And you've painted the picture that you guys waited, and you've kind of like distorted that reality a little bit. If your kids find out that that's not true, they will feel betrayed. They will feel like the spiritual, emotional guides in my life lied to me. And so be as honest as you can. And like you said, Heather, age appropriate. And let me tell you, sometimes it might traumatize them, and that's just gonna have to be okay. And here's my story. So Waylon was 7 years old. Waylon, my cute little guy who needs to know how everything works. He's basically a mini Heather. He was homeschooled at the time, so he was my only kid home. Ayla was at school. The boys, of course, were at school. And we were laying in bed watching like Bear Grylls or something like that. We were watching some survival show. And he had said he wanted to know how babies were born. And, I'm the teacher of let your kids guide the questions and answer truthfully as they ask them. So I'm in my head as like teacher Ashley and parent Ashley, and I'm like blushing. And I was like, yeah. So there's an egg in the mommy and there's a seed in the daddy, and the seed fertilizes the egg and then the baby grows. And he's like, how does the seed get inside the mommy? And I'm like, oh, okay. So then I said, well, the seed is in the penis and it goes inside the mommy. And he's like, well, I want to know how it gets there. I said, bud. So I tried to back out. Okay, I broke my own rules of like letting them guide the conversation. I said, I think we should talk about this when you're a little older. And he was like, I want to know how the seed gets in the mommy. It doesn't just walk out of the penis and go inside the mommy. And I was like, okay. So the penis gets hard and then daddy can kind of like push it in, and I'm like dying. And this is what I try to teach parents. Like, even if I do this all day, every day, and I'm like, we need to talk to our kids and break down shame and just create a culture where it's safe to talk. And I'm like dying inside. And I'm like, do it anyways. So I tell him this. And he burst in tears. And he's like,
gosh.
I never want to get married. I'm never having sex. And I was like, oh gosh, I traumatized him. And so I'm trying to take him off the ledge. And I'm like, you don't have to get married. There are some people who just live a life for God and they do not have to get married. I said, but I do think your desires will change as you get older. Like you feel comfortable kissing and hugging mommy, but you might not with other people. You may feel that way with your wife. And he's like, I'm not going to feel that way. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So he's still crying, he's still wanting to talk about it and just saying how disgusting that is. And so then I'm like, okay, I've given him all the information he needs. It's distraction time. And so I'm like, let's go get a snack and watch this show. Let's do this. So he gets totally calmed down. And then his sister gets home from school. She's 9. And he says, Ayla, guess what? And he tells her the whole story. And she was just like, ew, gross. And then just runs off to play. And like that's how the two different ones, you know, took the information. But even though that was very hard for both of us, he would have learned that information at some point. And to see that he reacted that way with me, I'm glad he reacted that way with me, because I was able to talk to him about how God designed it. And it's okay if he doesn't want to get married. That's fine too. You know, so it may not always turn out picture perfect when we're like, you know, you're just going to have to share with your kids at an age appropriate. Like, they may cry.
Yeah.
And that's okay. You know, that you're still going to be their safe person. And my kids, you know, now that Waylon's 12 now and Ayla's 14, they still will come to me and ask me questions or talk with me, even though that was quite emotional experience.
Yeah. That's good communication, though, really. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sorry it was traumatizing for both of you. Our third question says, how do I share with, and in parentheses it says, and apologize to my adult children? I think this one is really challenging because we might not know how much information is important information for them to have, all of the details, and then also to apologize how it impacted them or how it maybe changed their perspective can be a little bit challenging. When I think about this question and I think about my situation and going through a divorce and leaving my kid's dad, and then each one of them, us having conversations over the years about what happened and why things happened the way that they happened, I think that it's really challenging because I know that I've had 3 very different conversations based on what my kids needed to know, what they wanted to know, their temperaments, you know, all of those different things. I did recently have a conversation with my oldest son. It was probably last summer, and we went to visit them, him and his wife, and it's beautiful out, and we're out on the back patio, and we start talking about something that then leads to a conversation about the day that I physically left my home. And so, which is something that I hadn't thought about or talked about in a lot of years. And so, and part of that was because a situation happened when my son was deployed, and his wife, who was in the States, something happened to her and she needed help, and he felt helpless, which then brought to the surface the way that he felt on that day when, oh my gosh, I was bawling, you know, because you just don't know, you know what I mean? I didn't know on that day when I made a decision because it was the best decision for me at the time. Yeah. I had no idea how it would impact my kids. Yeah. And so, and even my oldest son, for him to be able to kind of, I think, bury some of that until this situation happened as an adult that then brought it all to the surface. And so we were able to have this really great conversation about it. And I was able to own my part in that and apologize and say I had no idea, that I was desperate. I was a desperate mom doing what I thought was best. And there's no way I could have known how it would have affected you. And thankfully, I knew how to get help, and I went and got help. And so that, to the best of my ability, I could raise sons that were healthy, that would love the Lord, and that would pursue a relationship with Christ, even though they had divorced parents. And so, but I think it's really hard, but we have to be willing to step into that mess. And I was so uncomfortable, and for me to just like cry. And my daughter-in-law, she didn't even know what to do because, you know, we're sitting there crying, and she's like, I don't know, can I cry? Can I be involved in this? Should I leave? But it really, though, did allow for a really beautiful and healing conversation to happen. But I don't know, there's no way I could have predicted that was that would happen when it happened. But I think that knowing now that it ended so well, I would just say, be willing to have the conversation, even if you don't know what that looks like, but when it comes up, be willing to step into it, because it's going to be so much better than you think it's going to be. And it's healing for, I mean, it was so healing for both of us, for us to just be able to sit there and talk about it and cry and hug and, you know, reaffirm that we're so thankful that God saved our family in the way that he did, even though we had to go through divorce, you know?
Yeah. And how old were the boys when, just to put that into perspective, like you're talking to your 31-year-old son?
Uh-huh.
And how old
31.
were they when that happened? Where he, like, it took that many years, like,
Yeah.
for him to experience that?
12.
12. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy how the brain is like, I felt this before.
Right.
I felt
right.
helpless before.
I remember this feeling.
Yeah. So, yeah, my story like that, I've shared it before on, at some of our conferences is similar, where Kairos was 14 and he didn't know he was feeling triggered. I recognized he was feeling triggered and feeling like I didn't care about him. And he's my little mini, so we think people don't care about us and we need to pursue love in all the crashing wave ways. And so he was very upset. And I remember, like, I was really wrestling with anger at that point. That was like the layer I was getting to in the onion of my healing. And I went down and talked with him, and I just said, I don't think you remember that there was a point where I couldn't take good care of you because I was such a mess. And unlike you, where you got counseling for your boys after the divorce and you kind of knew you got help. I was so fearful because I felt like you only needed Jesus. If you got help, there was something mentally wrong with you if you needed counseling. And then I feared, because there was custody things going on, that would be used against me, that I would look unstable mentally if I got help. And so what I did is just try to paint the picture on the outside, and I was dying inside. And this is when my eating disorder developed. This is when OCD did. And so I was a mess as an addict and a betrayed spouse at the same time, and going through divorce. And I just was not that great of a mom. I mean, I feel like I tried, but there was these snapping moments. And so when I told Kairos this and said, I think your brain remembers that there was a season where you probably did feel unloved, unwanted, abandoned, because you were going through so much chaos between your dad and myself and the divorce and both of us being addicts and me being betrayed. He's like, well, I don't remember that. And, you've always just been good Christian mom. And I was like, no. I kind of painted the picture of what happened, and he just started bawling. And I said, I'm sorry. And I just want you to know that was me and my unhealth. And I do see you and I do love you. And that was so healing for us, because I didn't see him responding to his trigger was being injured and thinking I didn't care. So I didn't see him responding to those triggers anymore. And even when he was having a little heart scare last year and I came up and went to the hospital, I ended up getting the nicest text from him of like, I wouldn't have been able to go through all this without you, and thank you for coming up. And then just as they got older, they made a comment when they were 19, I think, maybe 20, recently in their adult years. And I was able to fill them in more on the story of what happened that I wouldn't have when they were still in the home, when I was still co-parenting with their dad. And I think that just gave them more perspective of what I had gone through. And it really put it into perspective that I was the same age they are now with 2 babies going through a divorce. And that I was your age with 2 children.
Oh my gosh.
I was not that, great of a parent. And so part of me thinks that there's a healing in your parent-child relationship, and there's a closeness that you can get from being honest and apologetic about your experiences and saying, I might have been disengaged because I was going through betrayal or whatnot, that you could never have. It's almost like we don't want to go through betrayal trauma. We don't want to go through addiction, but so many of us, the majority of us that do our work, say the post-traumatic growth that comes out of it is life-altering. And I feel like that can be applied in some situations where you go back and have these conversations with your adult children and really own it and give them clarity to what was going on back then, that you don't want it, but the way that you respond to it and handle it later down the road could be really, like you said, just really beautiful for your relationship. And model to them how to be humble and own their stuff.
And so healing.
Yeah. Well, a good teary episode for us. So thank you for joining us in this conversation. And if you can think about it, we should be talking about it. So please send your questions to unfiltered@puredesire.org. Subscribe and share this episode and leave a review so other people can find us.